Just imagine for a moment two individuals who never met. One, an Indian prince who renounced his throne. The other, a carpenter from Galilee. Separated by centuries and thousands of miles, yet their ideas irrevocably altered the course of history, continuing to influence billions to this very day. We're talking about Buddha and Jesus, but today we won't pit them against each other in some epic clash of titans. Instead, we're going to do something rarely done. Explore what connects them. And believe me, the astonishing parallels in their teachings are far more numerous than you might imagine. Let's get our facts straight right away. Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, lived around the 5th century BCE in India. Jesus of Nazareth emerged roughly 500 years later in the Middle East. These were entirely different worlds, different cultures, different languages, different religious traditions. They simply could not have known about each other. And that's precisely what makes the parallels in their words and lives so utterly remarkable. So, where did it all begin? Not with some divine revelation from the heavens, but with a profoundly human, poignant experience. Both Buddha and Jesus began their journeys after confronting the stark reality of human suffering. Let's start with Buddha. Imagine a prince named Siddhartha. He lived in a luxurious palace surrounded by every conceivable pleasure. His father, the king, had done everything to shield his son from pain, old age, and death. But one day the prince ventured outside the palace walls, and what he witnessed changed him forever. He saw a frail old man, then a person ravaged by disease, and finally, a funeral procession. These three sights profoundly shook him to his core. He realized that neither his status nor his wealth could protect him from the same fate. This wasn't just a bad day. It was an existential shock that forced him to confront the ultimate question. If suffering is inevitable, is there any escape from it? Now fast forward 500 years to Galilee. Jesus wasn't a prince, he was a carpenter. He wasn't shielded from suffering. He lived right in the midst of it. Every day he witnessed poverty, the injustice of Roman occupation, sickness, and people's despair. His ministry didn't begin in a vacuum. It was a direct response to the pain he saw all around him. He saw people who, as he described them, were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. For him, suffering wasn't a philosophical puzzle, but the everyday reality of his people. And here's the crucial point. One encountered suffering by stepping out of an idealized world. The other lived within that suffering from birth. But their conclusion was identical. Something had to be done about it. This profound empathy became the driving force that launched two of history's most influential spiritual revolutions. So what do they do next, confronted with this profound universal suffering? They don't write letters of complaint or establish a charitable foundation. Instead, they take the most radical step imaginable. They simply leave. Both abandon their familiar, understandable worlds. At 29, Prince Siddhartha secretly abandons his palace. Just imagine. He leaves behind his wife, his newborn son, his aging father, and the throne he was destined to inherit. He cuts off his long hair, a potent symbol of his status, and exchanges his silken robes for the simple rags of an ascetic. He willingly becomes a homeless wanderer. This was no impulsive teenage whim. It was a deliberate choice by a man who had realized that within the palace walls he would never find the answer to his ultimate question. And what about Jesus? His departure was less dramatic in terms of material luxury, yet no less resolute. He forsakes his carpenter's bench, the very trade that sustained him. He bids farewell to his family, to his familiar life in Nazareth, and sets off as a wandering preacher. Homeless, penniless, relying solely on the hospitality of strangers, he too chooses a path of uncertainty and constant wandering. Here we see a striking parallel. One relinquishes immense wealth, the other a stable, common life. But the core insight is the same for both. They understood that to truly seek truth, they had to shed the shackles of the familiar world. They had to transcend its boundaries. This step, the voluntary renunciation of everything they possessed, became the genesis of their incredible journeys. And here we arrive at the first, and perhaps most striking, similarity, one that truly challenges our modern perception of these figures. Neither of them, initially, ever referred to themselves as God. Let's unpack that. Buddha never claimed divinity. Quite the opposite, in fact. He consistently emphasized that he was human, a human being who woke up, who awakened from the illusions of this world. The very word Buddha translates to the awakened one. He was a teacher, a guide, a physician who diagnosed human suffering and found the cure. He famously told his followers, "Don't just take my word for it. Investigate my teachings for yourselves." He was like someone who found a path through a dense forest and then drew a map for others. He didn't say, "Worship me." He said, "Here's the map. Follow this path." And what about Jesus? This is a more complex question, as modern Christianity is profoundly built on the idea of his divinity. But if we look at the Gospels, we uncover an intriguing detail. Jesus himself most often referred to himself as the Son of Man. He spoke of his heavenly Father, but he defined his own role as a messenger, a shepherd, a teacher. The concept of Jesus being an equal part of the divine Trinity is the result of long and intense theological debates that unfolded for centuries after his death. During his lifetime, much like Buddha, he was primarily a teacher who brought a new message to people and showed them a new way. Moving on, both of them didn't merely introduce new teachings, they directly challenged the religious establishment of their time. They were, in essence, spiritual revolutionaries. Now, let's consider Buddha. During his time in India, the Brahmins held sway, a priestly caste that claimed exclusive communication with the gods. They performed elaborate, costly rituals. Society was rigidly divided by castes, and it was widely believed that one's birth determined their entire spiritual destiny. Then Buddha emerged and said, "No." He declared that the path to enlightenment was open to everyone, regardless of caste, be it a warrior, a merchant, or even an untouchable. He taught that salvation wasn't achieved through sacrifices to the gods, but through personal effort, through cultivating one's own mind. This was a direct challenge to the power and authority of the Brahmins. And what about Jesus? He was doing much the same in Judea. He openly criticized the Pharisees and scribes, the religious elite of his day. He accused them of hypocrisy, saying they were fixated on the outward observance of hundreds of minor rules, yet had forgotten the core principles: justice, mercy, and love. His famous words, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath," were truly revolutionary. He prioritized compassion for living beings over the rigid adherence to sacred law. Both of them, in essence, conveyed the same message. You have turned living faith into dead, ritual, and rigid instruction. It's time to return to the heart of the matter. Now let's dive into the very core of their teachings. And what do we find at its centre? Suffering. Yes, both begin precisely with this, the most painful aspect of human existence. Buddha articulated this with absolute clarity in his Four Noble Truths. The first truth states, there is suffering. He called it dukkha. And this isn't merely physical pain or sadness. Dukkha is a far deeper feeling. It's a pervasive sense of dissatisfaction, unease, and anxiety that infiltrates our entire lives. Even when we're happy, we fear losing that happiness. It's a constant feeling that something is missing. Buddha wasn't a pessimist. He was a realist. He taught, before you can heal a sickness, you must first honestly acknowledge its presence. What about Jesus? Though he spoke a different language, his message resonated with the same truth. He constantly addressed the weary and burdened. He spoke of the sorrows and burdens that people carry. His Sermon on the Mount begins with the words, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." He didn't promise an easy life free of problems. He recognized that life is full of trials and injustices. He saw suffering and did not turn away from it. His message was specifically aimed at those who suffer. Thus, both teachers used suffering not as a reason for despair, but as a crucial starting point. They essentially said, yes, life is difficult. Yes, there is pain, but don't despair. There is a way out. Their shared purpose was to reveal this way out of the labyrinth of suffering. All right. Both acknowledged a fundamental problem: suffering. What solution did they offer? Was it perhaps to pray to specific gods, to perform elaborate rituals? No. Their answer was both simple and profoundly complex. They proposed an inner transformation. This is the crucial point. Both Buddha and Jesus taught that the root of our problems isn't external, not in bad government, not in evil spirits, not in flawed sacrifices. The root of all problems lies within us, in our own mind, in our heart. Buddha taught that our suffering stems from our own desires, our greed, anger, and ignorance. He called these the poisons of the mind. And to free oneself from suffering, one must purify the mind of these poisons. He offered a complete path to achieve this, the Eightfold Path, which involves practices like meditation, mindfulness, right thinking, and right conduct. In essence, it was a program of mental hygiene, a system for training the mind. Jesus spoke of the same principle, though using different language. He called for repentance, which in its original Greek is metanoia. And metanoia literally means a change of mind. It's not merely regret for past wrongdoings, it's a complete transformation of consciousness, a fundamental shift in one's entire way of thinking. As he said, first clean the inside of the cup, so that the outside may become clean as well. He taught that what truly matters isn't external actions, but inner motives. Not rituals, but the purity of the heart. Both pointed to the same truth. A true revolution doesn't happen in the streets, but within the mind and heart of each individual. So, what exactly are these internal changes we're talking about? And once again, we see an almost uncanny alignment. Both advocated a radical detachment from material possessions. They saw the relentless pursuit of wealth and worldly goods as a major root of human suffering. Buddha was absolutely unambiguous on this. The second noble truth declares that the origin of suffering is tanha, a powerful craving, an insatiable desire. This includes the desire to own things, to indulge in sensual pleasures, or to become someone important. He taught that the tighter we cling to possessions, the more profound our pain will be when we inevitably lose them. And we will lose them, because in this world, everything is impermanent. Therefore, he believed, the path to true freedom is through weakening these attachments, through cultivating a spirit of non-attachment. He himself provided a vivid example, relinquishing his throne and all worldly riches. And Jesus? His pronouncements on this subject are even more stark and widely recognized. Remember his famous declaration, "It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." That's an astonishingly powerful statement, isn't it? He famously advised, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." He called on his followers to live simply, free from anxiety about tomorrow, much like the birds of the air, who neither sow nor reap. Both leaders recognized that the ceaseless race for material gain is a profound trap for the human mind. It fosters anxiety, envy, and fear, ultimately turning individuals into slaves of their own possessions. Their collective message was unequivocal. Genuine richness resides not in what we accumulate externally, but in what we cultivate within. Okay, so we let go of attachments, we change our mindset, but what replaces selfishness and greed? This is where we get to the very heart of both teachings, to the idea that became their hallmark: compassion, or more broadly, love. In Buddhism, these are known as metta and karuna. Karuna is compassion, the ability to feel another's pain as your own. Metta, however, is an even broader concept. It's loving kindness. This is an unconditional, warm, and friendly disposition towards all living beings without exception, not just to friends and family, but also to strangers and even to enemies. Buddhist monks meditate for hours, intentionally cultivating this feeling within themselves, mentally extending it to all corners of the universe. It's not merely an emotion, it's a conscious practice. Now consider what Jesus taught. His message can be distilled into two main commandments: love God and love your neighbour as yourself. When asked who his neighbour was, he told the parable of the Good Samaritan, demonstrating that a neighbour is anyone in need of help, even if they belong to an opposing group. But Jesus went even further. He uttered words unimaginable for his time. Love your enemies, bless those who curse you. In Christianity, this all-encompassing love is called agape. It's not romantic affection or mere friendship. It's an unconditional, selfless love that asks for nothing in return. Notice the parallels: meta and agape. Different words from distinct cultures, yet they describe the very same feeling. It's a radical empathy, a transcendence of the ego, and the recognition of another's inherent worth. This is the very remedy for suffering that both teachings offered to the world. But how do you convey such profound and revolutionary ideas to ordinary people, to the fishermen, farmers, and merchants? This is where both teachers intuitively stumbled upon the same brilliant pedagogical approach. They spoke in parables. They didn't write complex philosophical treatises or deliver abstruse lectures. Instead, they told short, vivid, and memorable stories drawn directly from everyday life. These stories acted like small capsules of wisdom. They were easily grasped by a child, yet held layers of meaning one could contemplate for a lifetime. Think of Jesus' parables, the story of the prodigal son who returned home, the sower scattering seeds, or the lost sheep that the shepherd sought, leaving the 99. These images immediately lodge themselves in our memory, conveying profound ideas of forgiveness, faith, and the inherent worth of every soul, far more powerfully than any sermon ever could. And Buddha? He too was a master storyteller. Take, for instance, his famous parable of the mustard seed. A woman whose only son had died came to him, pleading for him to bring her child back to life. Buddha agreed, but on one condition: she had to bring him a mustard seed from a house where no one had ever died. She scoured the entire village but naturally found no such home. Thus, through this personal experience, she came to understand the universality of suffering and the inevitability of death. Both understood. For an idea to truly transform a person, it must touch not only their mind, but also their heart. And the best way to reach the heart is to tell a good story. The teachings were profound, and the method of delivery was clear. But how do you spread such ideas in a world without the internet or printing presses? Here we observe a striking parallel in their strategy. Both gathered a small yet profoundly dedicated group of disciples around them. These were no casual followers. These were individuals who sacrificed everything, their families, homes, and livelihoods, to dedicate themselves entirely to their teacher. They literally walked in his footsteps, shared meals, slept under the open sky, and absorbed his every word. This was not learning from texts, but through personal example and constant living interaction. The Buddha had his Sangha, a devoted community of monks. Among the most renowned were Ananda, his cousin and loyal attendant, the wise Sariputra, and the powerful Maudgalyayana. Despite their distinct personalities, they were united by an unwavering faith in their teacher and his path. After the Buddha's passing, it was they who became the custodians of his teachings, memorizing his sermons and transmitting them faithfully by word of mouth. Jesus too had his 12 apostles. They were humble fishermen like Peter and Andrew, and a tax collector like Matthew, ordinary people from everyday life. He chose them not for their education or social standing, but because he saw in them potential and unwavering faith. They became his inner circle, his chosen family. And after his crucifixion, it was these seemingly unremarkable individuals who, overcoming their fear and doubts, carried his message to the ends of the earth, laying the foundation for a future world religion. In both instances, we observe the identical pattern: a charismatic leader, supported by a cohesive core of followers who become the living vessels and disseminators of their ideas. No great spiritual leader's journey is complete without a pivotal test, a defining moment when they must choose between the worldly and the spiritual. Both Buddha and Jesus faced such a moment, a great temptation, and the scenarios of these temptations are eerily similar. Just before his enlightenment, as Siddhartha sat meditating under the Bodhi tree, the demon Mara appeared to him. Mara, the lord of illusion and the god of desire and death, unleashed his full arsenal upon the future Buddha. First, he sent his beautiful daughters, lust, pleasure and thirst, to tempt him. When that failed, he summoned an army of terrifying demons to frighten him. And when even that proved futile, Mara offered him the ultimate temptation, power over the entire world. He said, "What good is this enlightenment? Become a great king, unite the world under your rule, and do good." But Siddhartha remained unmoved. He simply touched the earth with his hand, and the earth bore witness to his resolve. Consider now the story of Jesus. After his baptism, he went into the desert for 40 days, and there the devil appeared to him. The pattern was strikingly similar. First, the physical temptation. Turn these stones into bread. Then the temptation of pride and miracle. Jump from the temple's pinnacle and angels will save you. And finally, the ultimate temptation, power. The devil showed him all the kingdoms of the world and said, "All this I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus, like Buddha, rejected this offer, choosing his spiritual path. Both faced the same choice, the easy path of worldly power or the difficult path of spiritual liberation. And both made the same choice which ultimately defined their entire subsequent mission. This commitment to a spiritual path inevitably led them to another fundamental shared principle, non-violence. Both teachers unequivocally rejected aggression and revenge as solutions to conflict. In Buddhism, this principle is known as ahimsa. This Sanskrit word means non-harming. It's more than just a passive avoidance of violence. It's an active practice of kindness and compassion towards all living beings, from humans to the tiniest insect. Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. Hatred is appeased by love alone. This is an eternal law. He urged his followers to meet anger with calm, evil with good, and greed with generosity. This represented a complete re-evaluation of the values prevalent in the warlike society of his time. What about Jesus? He articulated this same idea in his Sermon on the Mount, perhaps in an even more radical and startling form. Remember his words? "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also." This was a direct and unequivocal rejection of the principle of retaliation, which formed the bedrock of ancient justice. He urged not merely passive endurance of evil, but an active response of goodness, to pray for those who persecute you and bless those who curse you. Both Buddha and Jesus understood a simple yet profound truth. Violence only begets more violence. The only way to break this vicious cycle is to counter it with the power of love and compassion. This remains one of the most challenging, yet also one of the most powerful aspects of their teachings. There's another fascinating fact that connects them and reveals a great deal about the nature of their legacy. Neither Buddha nor Jesus ever wrote anything themselves, not a single line. Think about that. These were individuals whose words formed the bedrock of vast volumes of sacred texts, the Buddhist Tripitaka and the Christian Bible, yet they personally left no written records. They were teachers of an oral tradition. Their entire teaching consisted of a living, dynamic word, delivered in specific situations to particular individuals. They interacted directly with their disciples, answering questions, telling stories, and engaging in dialogues. Everything we know about their teachings was recorded by their followers, and it wasn't recorded immediately. The first Buddhist text began to take shape at the First Buddhist Council shortly after Buddha's death, but weren't fully committed to writing until several centuries later. Disciples gathered and reconstructed his sermons from memory. The famous phrase, "Thus I have heard," which begins every sutra, specifically highlights that these are not Buddha's own words, but a recollection by his disciple Ananda. The same holds true for the Gospels. They were written decades after Jesus' crucifixion, roughly between 70 and 100 CE. Their authors were not stenographers following Christ with a notebook. They compiled oral traditions, eyewitness accounts, early Christian hymns, and from these they crafted coherent narratives. This is a crucial point. It means we're not dealing with a dry, factual record, but with a living legacy filtered through the hearts and minds of the first disciples, and that makes their words even more precious. Finally, and perhaps most revolutionary of all, is the universal nature of their teachings. Both of them transcended the narrow confines of national and tribal religions, speaking instead to all of humanity. In the world where Buddha lived, spirituality was deeply intertwined with one's birth. It was widely believed that liberation was accessible only to members of the highest castes, yet Buddha proclaimed that his teaching, his Dharma, was like an ocean where all rivers converge. Just as river water, upon entering the ocean, loses its distinct identity and becomes one with the sea, so too does anyone, regardless of their caste, who joins his spiritual community, shed their former status and become simply a follower of the path. He forged a teaching not for a particular social group, but for all of humanity. A remarkably similar narrative unfolded with Jesus. He was born and ministered among the Jewish people, for whom religion and national identity were intrinsically linked. They saw themselves as a chosen people and their faith was deeply rooted in their heritage. While Jesus primarily engaged with his own kin, the seeds of universalism were unmistakably present in his teachings. He healed Romans and Samaritans, often highlighting their faith as an example. His final commandment to his disciples was clear: go and make disciples of all nations. This universal mandate empowered his apostles, most notably Paul, to carry Christianity beyond the confines of Judea, transforming it from a small Jewish sect into a global religion. Essentially, both proclaimed to the world, it matters not your birth, the colour of your skin, or the language you speak. The doors to truth, salvation and liberation from suffering are open to you. It is this profound universality that enabled their ideas to traverse oceans and continents, remaining profoundly relevant to billions of people even today. So, we've explored the main parallels, right? But what if I told you that, after their passing, the trajectory of their teachings followed a strikingly similar path? Both left behind a simple, clear, and deeply personal teaching focused on inner transformation. But what happened next? It then evolved into what we now know as world religions. And this transformation followed a remarkably consistent pattern. The teaching, initially centered on personal experience and practice, began to accumulate complex dogmas, theological systems, and philosophical treatises. A simple community of disciples, be it a sangha or a group of apostles, eventually transformed into powerful hierarchical institutions. Think of the church or vast monastic organizations, complete with their own rules, doctrines, and immense authority. Direct interaction with the teacher gave way to elaborate rituals, opulent ceremonies, and the veneration of relics and images. In essence, the focus shifted from internal transformation to outward expressions of faith. Both Buddha and Jesus, who in life were rebels against the religious establishment, were, after their deaths, transformed into the very cornerstone figures of that establishment. Jesus, once a teacher, became God, an object of worship. The Buddha, from a human guide, similarly evolved into a quasi-deity in many traditions, to whom prayers are offered and devotions are made. I'm not here to say whether this is good or bad. It appears to be an inevitable historical process. Any profound idea, to survive through the ages and reach millions, arguably needs to take the form of an institution. But it's crucial to remember that beneath all this complex, centuries-old edifice, at its very foundation, lie the remarkably simple and clear ideas of two individuals who simply wished to show others a path to freedom from suffering. And this brings us to the heart of the matter, the truly surprising twist. It's not about isolated quotes or biographical tidbits. What's truly astonishing is that two individuals, living in vastly different circumstances, independently reached remarkably similar conclusions about human nature and the meaning of life. It's like two brilliant programmers, unaware of each other, wrote strikingly similar code for the human operating system. They both understood that the root of suffering lies in our selfish desires and attachments, and the remedy is found in compassion, love, and transcending the ego. Their teachings aren't competing brands vying for your soul. They are two different languages, two distinct maps leading to the same peak, a state of harmony, peace, and unconditional love. Thank you for watching this video all the way through. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us create more content. And let us know in the comments which shared characteristic of Buddha and Jesus surprised you the most. We'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next video.